Today, I'm really happy to be joined by Zenki Christian Dillo Roshi. And I am Nicky, Antonellis. I'm one of the founders of Dharma Gates, and currently on the board of directors and serving as lead program coordinator. I have been with Dharma Gates for the last 6 years and helping to develop programming and create the nonprofit into what it is today. So really happy to have Zenki Roshi with me here today. Zenki is the resident teacher at Boulder Zen Center. He began his Zen practice in 1996 at the San Francisco Zen Center. For 20 years, he practiced monastically at the Crestone Mountain Zen Center. In 2013, he received Dharma transmission from Zentatsu Baker Roshi. Since then, he has been Boulder Zen Center's guiding teacher. In 2020, he moved to Boulder full-time, where he now lives with his wife and son. Zenki Roshi teaches Zen as a craft based on his understanding of Buddhism as a transformative phenomenology, an embodied investigation of human experience with the intention of realizing liberation from suffering, wisdom, and compassion. He is currently developing a series of practice courses to actively support lay practitioners in their daily lives. This curriculum is aligned with his book, The Path of Aliveness, a contemporary Zen approach to awakening body and mind. And so with that, I wanted to thank you for your time today, Zenki, and joining me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to talking with you.
I think the first thing I'm curious about is sort of for you when you were a young person, what sort of things were going on in your life that maybe started to shift things towards eventually Zen practice and then, really going all in a way, living for decades at a very remote Zen monastery.
Okay. Well, maybe I should say I was born and raised in Germany. Now I've been in the United States. I'm an American citizen for almost 25 years. Lived here continuously. I grew up in a sort of Lutheran context. Religion wasn't that important in my parents' life. Although my mother was part of a parish and was active, but I always felt like more socially. My father, I think, was, I looked to him more for spiritual guidance, but he was not really interested in the church at all. He was interested in kind of the teaching itself, and he always subtracted the institution. That appealed to me. He was really well read in all kinds of ways, literature and philosophy, and so I think I was influenced by him. But I went through the whole thing. It's like went to church, had confirmation, and it all didn't make sense to me. And in hindsight, I would say it didn't make sense because it wasn't experiential. It was like I was asked to believe certain things, and they didn't make a whole lot of sense to me when I was a teenager, 15, 16, I remember. I was starting to question all of it. It's like, this is like we're supposed to believe these stories and have faith in a God that's not like experientially accessible, and I'm just supposed to do something, and I turned away from it internally and then externally. And I think I lived kind of in denial of the need for some kind of spiritual depth in my life. It's like because what was offered to me didn't work, So I kind of turned to literature and philosophy and psychology and read a lot. It's like I went to university in Germany, master's degree, but I was kind of studying very widely. And then I reached a point where, again, searching for some kind of truth to base my life on, it sort of fell apart. I was not impressed with my academic teachers. I mean, they weren't mentors for me. I didn't feel like they were walking the talk, if you could say. There wasn't. I didn't find a direction that was about transformation. You said in my short bio there, liberation from suffering, wisdom and compassion. I didn't see that. I increasingly noticed that was not what I was getting in my academic training, and not in philosophy either. And so that, combined with a sense of depression, I think I need to call it that, a feeling of being lost, having a kind of meaning crisis, not really knowing what to meaningfully do with my life, brought me to a kind of crisis point. And I didn't know what to do, and what offered itself up was to go on a exchange program that my university had with 40 colleges and universities in the United States, and I applied for that, and just to get away, just to do something different. Really, that was my plan. I didn't have any other objectives for that year of being in the United States. And you could write down, so they would place you, but you could sort of have a preference, and I just wrote down Bay Area, and they had a program with Berkeley and a program with San Francisco State University, but it turned out in Berkeley I would have had to teach German 101, and that seemed like too much of an obligation. I wanted no obligation. So I ended up going to San Francisco State University, and basically with the intention to not do anything academically. So I used the program to get away, be somewhere else, be partially funded, and that's what I did. I did some independent studies there to meet the minimum requirements. And other than that, I continue to feel lost. Like they say, wherever you go, there you are. And I felt pretty miserable. And I had a wonderful housemate there. She was a high school teacher in Marin County, and one day, it was just out of the blue, she said to me, she was crossing the bridge into Marin from the city, to go to work. But she said, there's this place I go to, Zen Center, and they have Sunday talks, and I go sometimes. You want to come? And I just didn't have anything to do, and I said, okay. And it changed my life. I arrived. They gave me some instruction for how to sit, and I had never meditated, and I tried it out, and I had a pretty deep experience right away. In hindsight, I'd say in connecting through the breath and into my body, I had an experience that I now call, I felt unapologetically alive. It still shows up in the title of my book, The Path of Aliveness. I felt alive in a way I hadn't before. In addition, there was a talk, and I had the feeling for the first time, okay, here's someone who's actually talking about what matters to me. So I knew about Buddhism, but not about it as a practice. And I felt that here was potentially a path that included the body and that sense of aliveness, and a teaching that was actually talking about my existential feelings. And so I was in a crisis enough personally that I just said, okay, I'm just going to do this. And that's what I did. That day I bought myself a cushion at the store that they had there, and I started sitting every day. And my friend, our housemate, I said to her, so, are we going to sit now? And she's like, well, no. And I had learned enough, like just that one day that, they were getting up early. And I said, we're just going to sit in the morning before you go to school. And can we do it in the living room? Can we move the couch? So I was very enthusiastic right away. Like I'd knock at her door in the morning and say, it's time to sit. And sometimes she'd say, oh, no, I'm not going to get up. And I sat by myself. Sometimes she joined. And I had a practice. After that one visit, I had a daily practice. And it just continued from there. I might mention, there was one connection, not directly about Buddhism, but I had some psychosomatic issues. I had pain in my throat when talking and a lot of tension. And I had a medical evaluation. This is before I left to go to the United States. And I started to have a bit of a psychosomatic therapy that came out of that, and an interest in making a connection with bodily sensations, other than being, doing sports, which I did a lot when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. And this was a lead-in, a kind of somatic practice that got activated in my early sitting practice too, just to feel more located in my body.
It's interesting your story. There's a lot of parallels to my experience getting into practice as well, being in college and a master's degree as well, and having a type of crisis mode and mental health problems that were, it's hard to remember how much suffering I was experiencing, but my memory tells me it was a lot, quite significant. And then, a friend just inviting me up to a intro to Zen retreat, and I'd done some mindfulness practices, but that moment of being around people who were talking about the things that mattered the most, and doing practices that were starting to actually address like my suffering in a certain real way, and that being sort of that some moment where things were realigning, and followed by enthusiasm quite a bit, and sort of like this discovery process. I think hearing what you said at the end, I'm curious too about how, so it sounds like you started into this, I'm guessing some sort of mindfulness of breathing practice or mindfulness of body, and I'd be curious where that, it sounds like the somatic part was very important to you in those early years maybe especially, and like where did that go for you in your practice, and how did that maybe shift or actually benefit you over time?
The somatic piece?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the early years of my practice were really a kind of amazement at discovering how much attention was entangled with, glued to discursive thinking. It's just, I think this is also something I discuss with newcomers to the practice. It's like when you first sit down, that's what you notice. You notice how much is going on in your mind, like that you don't have a full conscious awareness of when you just walk around in your life. It's like, yeah, you know there's thinking, but not that it's like so continuous, so chaotic at times, wild. So I discovered that, and just the discipline of learning to notice that I could have some control of attention, that was a lot. Just to have the instruction, when you notice that attention is entangled with discursive thinking or lost in it, you know, that you can kind of take it and bring it to the hara, as we would say, and then your belly, the center of gravity, and then notice the sensations of breathing, and that's an alternative, that it makes a new location, basically. Right? I completely experienced myself as living in this head-shoulder triangle. Like if somebody asked me, you know, where are you, you know, in your body, I would say like in here, you know, behind my ears, behind my eyes, between my ears, like sort of there, and that energy is also trapped here. And this body from the neck downward is kind of like secondary. You know, you can use it as an instrument. You know, I'm moderately good at athletic activity, and you know, somewhat physically gifted. It's not hard for me to learn something, play with a ball or something. So I knew my body in this way, but I had not discovered this dimension that I could inhabit it from the inside, so to speak. I mean, the inside and outside, I have different ideas about that now, but so that was a big discovery. But I would say, in terms of where am I located in my body, and that coming down into my belly and feeling myself located there and starting to feel the world from that place instead of from a headspace where the implicit imperative is always like to think the world, to have an idea about it, to have an opinion about stuff, to know what to say, to understand. That was called into question by the practice. And I think it happened really just incrementally over time. It's not like there's a point where it just flipped for me, but it's like increasingly I could be somewhere and not be experiencing the anxiousness of this heady person, you know?
Yeah.
So being able to walk into situations and feel located in the center of my body and basically see what happens, feel like I have room to respond. I'm not running a commentary while I'm listening to somebody. That's completely gone. I used to do that, you know. It's like listen and kind of have my own commentary. It's like that's gone. It's like it's silent. I can listen, and then I feel room to respond. So it's a huge relief. So that's, I think, the first thing is like finding a way to be differently located in my body, and then by extension, I think that changes how I felt located in the world.
Yeah. I think for me, that's when I started Zen practice as well. I was directed towards the hara, and that was kind of my first practice, breathing through the hara for many years. And I guess as you speak, to me, there's like this miracle or something of this practice to just that practice in and of itself of coming into the breath, and especially the lower part, the hara. And I also think about just how across lineages it seems as though that practice is sort of given as the introductory or as the like first thing for whatever, maybe for the reasons you just said, but and so yeah, I don't know, I guess that's personally very grateful as well for that practice. I guess the next thing that I get curious about there, just from the practice view, is so I did mindfulness of breathing for many, many years, and then eventually there was this inclination to like open more, and for one, it just being different than like being in one place, and I think for me that's been a very like beneficial experience. And I guess I'm curious, in your practice, I imagine at some point a teacher directed you like, okay, now you can open, or something like this. And I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I'm amazed at how little instruction I received. I mean, that's a bit of a provocative statement. It's I received a lot of instruction in the form of Dharma discourses that really pointed to a different worldview. But in terms of like, this is how to meditate, it's like I didn't get a whole lot of instruction. Little pieces that I put together, and I'm grateful for that, because I kind of learned to find out my own path. But to pick up what you said, it's an experience that I had of needing to kind of almost naturally, attention wanting to widen. I think it's actually really difficult to talk about this as stages or, delineate it clearly. But I did try it. Like in my book, I'm basically differentiating 3, maybe 4, we could say four stages, progressions. Like the first, in Zen practice, and I was taught this, it's common to start with counting the breath. And so you bring attention to breathing, and then I learned to count my exhales, to count from 1 to 10. But if you get interrupted by discursive thinking somewhere, like you counted to 3, and then thoughts come in, you return to 1. And it's very mechanical and kind of boring. And but it keeps you honest in a way. It's like, okay, so discursive thinking comes in, you leave that, go back to 1. And I did that for many years. And then I noticed, so now I teach this as, okay, well, so what is the counting about? You're using the naming function of the mind. Really, the numbers are kind of name stickers for the exhales. You could name them in, out, or 1, 2, 3, doesn't really matter. There's some benefit in, I think, being able to return to 1. To kind of noticing how you're doing, but you use the naming function of the mind. Like in Vipassana meditation, you use labels, and you can name sights as sights and sounds as sounds. And this is also using the naming function of the mind. And what it does, as far as I can tell, is it stabilizes attention on your chosen target of meditation. In this case, the sensations of breathing. And you train attention to become more and more stable over time. And then you can leave the naming function aside as you don't need it, and then you're practicing following breathing without having to count it. And I discovered that, and it was exhilarating. I remember it's like, wow, attention can just be immersed in these sensations of breathing. I don't have to use any names, numbers, words to stabilize it. I can just be there. And felt liberating. I felt liberated from counting. I also felt liberated in this stabilized attention. And then, of course, I don't know if it's of course, but I discovered, okay, well, I don't have to be limited to the sensations of breathing. I can, attention can go into all the different sense fields. I can hear sounds and follow sounds, and I think it's quite different, but you can follow sights. But it takes a little bit more sophistication, I think, of like feeling units of experience that you feel like you can rest your attention on for a little bit and then move on, because vision kind of slides around, whereas sounds they kind of appear. It's a different phenomenal field, but I noticed that this following could be extended into these other sense fields, and I was doing that mostly on walks. Like when I was walking by myself, I would practice following. It was just allowing sense impressions to come and be received, and I experienced that as very enriching. It started to expand the mind from being mostly internally focused to like, oh, now all these sense fields are similarly accessible to attention. And then you realize that the world is a kind of phenomenal space that comes, arises through the sense fields, and that attention can be kind of plugged into it. So at that time, I felt actually more resolved also about my existential crisis of feeling like, oh yeah, there's a sense of belonging in the world just by being sensorially located in it. First it was like located in the body, but then you could be, maybe you say first located in breath, then located in the body, and then located in phenomena. It's a kind of, just through this natural progression of stabilized attention that then can more naturally follow sensorial events, I felt expanded in that way. And then I would say the next step was to realize what I now call the field of mind. We can just call it awareness too. It's to feel located in a more spacious mind and feeling the ability to rest in it. At first I felt like I had to make a place that was kind of the hara and or more specifically this point, below the navel, inside the tanda in Japanese or dantin in Chinese. I practice Qigong too, where this is, important place that you cultivate. Sort of you feel you can locate yourself in that center. But then to start to feel like you could be located in space without a center. This is something that I feel comes from, first counting or naming, following, and then resting in that spaciousness of the mind.
I have a question on that. So for me personally, there was coming into like more of an open awareness style practice initially through some Theravada practices where you're doing more of the naming that you described, a little bit of labeling. And I think one of the values was, okay, there's a experience, and especially if I'm not actually aware that I'm aware of that experience, is like noting it. Okay, now there's anger, there's a sound, there's body, and that just opening up to being allowed to be aware of different things was very liberating for me. And not always labeling, but just actually inviting in different experiences. At first with mindfulness of breathing, and then just going to allowing other objects felt almost indulgent, as like, oh, I'm allowed to just experience reality.
Yeah.
So that was that's been the last couple of years, and that was very liberating, and just allowing my mind to experience that. I think what I get curious about when you mentioned the space is, I guess there's a way to in practice, it seems like there's a way to be like a meditator who's aware of the objects, like noting, or like there's some intentionality towards objects, like thoughts, and you're like, I'm aware of this, I'm aware of that. And I don't know if you have any thoughts around sort of what seems like a different way of being, and where there's a way of like allowing things to come into awareness and then leave, and a little bit less of like an active engagement with meditation, or like I'm going to be aware of everything, more of and one way in which this manifests in my view is going from like having a very concrete label and having maybe some verbal, like this is X, versus like what is it, really like not going a little bit away from any label. So I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I think the following, if you go from naming to following, the following starts to have that quality of, of not knowing actually, because you're just allowing sense impressions to arise, and sometimes you really don't know what it is. Like you hear a sound and you don't know what it is, and you couldn't know. You couldn't know what label it deserves. If you wanted to give it a name, you can call it a sound, but that's very general. So I think that's actually, dipping your toe into the practice of not knowing is like when you leave the labels, and also not knowing where the mind is going to go next. It's like if you have a very dedicated practice of following your breathing, right? You know that the mind should return to breathing, and it's like a distraction if you go somewhere else. If you start opening this up and attention is invited to land with any sense impression, or any sense impression is allowed to land with you. You said something like that, right? Yeah, it's liberating, and then you don't know where it goes next. That was a curiosity of mine. It's like, where does my mind go? Like, what's the preferred stuff that it wants to pick up? That was a curiosity of mine for a while. I remember talking to my teacher about it, and I think he just said like, yeah, that's interesting to observe. There wasn't any right or wrong, which was also interesting. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, we have different conditionings. My mind tends to go to certain things, and your mind goes to other things. we could talk about that, but I wouldn't know exactly. But you can find out through your own meditation what your mind does. But I remember, again, on one of the walks I took, it's like there was a turning word that was floating around in my mind, no inside, no outside, that was presented in a Dharma talk, and I kind of took it on as an investigation, and that I think is the next thing. Once attention is sufficiently stabilized, you can really rest in the field of mind, then you can investigate. You can sort of take up a question, like knowing, not a question, I mean, in this case it's a statement, but implies many questions. No inside, no outside. What is inside? What is outside? Like, where is the boundary? How do you determine these things? And I remember there's this big expanse in Crestland where you can stand there and then you see, 80 miles to the west, and there's this big expanse of the San Luis Valley and the mountains in the back and lots of sky. And no inside, no outside, and I started to feel like the boundary of my body was, indeterminate. It was like it wasn't really there, and I felt like my awareness of so-called internal sensations and my awareness of this big expanse with its sights, just what I was seeing, sounds, there was wind, tactile. This was all one mix, it didn't make sense really to divide it up. Conventionally speaking, makes sense to separate inside and outside, but that was a certain kind of opening experience of allowing it all just to be there in an open space. And so for me, things sort of put themselves together piece by piece, And it's, in a way, I think the teaching often created certain pressures. I felt like I was supposed to experience something that I wasn't, or maybe I was experiencing something, but it didn't fit into the teachings or phrases that I was given. It was a wrestling of like coming to terms with my own experience and allowing the language to meet it. It's like a prolonged state of confusion, seeming confusion or wrestling or struggle of like, am I experiencing the right thing? In hindsight, I think it's kind of funny how little I was really trusting of whatever the experience was. I've been practicing Qigong with a teacher for 10 years, and when I started the Qigong practice, I was already much more experienced as a Zen practitioner. But at some point, it feels like I fell back into some sort of fallacy of a student. I said to my teacher, it's like he was giving a certain instruction on one of the exercises, and I was doing it, and I was saying like, well, is it supposed to be this way or that way experientially? And he said, well, it's just what it is. Like whatever it is for you, that's what it is. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, so thank you for that reminder. And then he said something that became really important for me, and he said, and it will change. And that was a simple thing, and it will change. That even, you have some kind of experience, and then it will change. It's not static. Like this experience, say, that I referenced of like looking out on this valley expanse in the sky and feeling like losing the boundary of my body and in a way realizing no inside, no outside, right? And it will change. It's not like some fixed experience that you can then hold on to.
Yeah, I resonate with that a bit, at least the trying to hold on to the experience part. I think, well, when I was doing more mindfulness of breathing practice, there's a way where there's an easier way to believe that those experiences can be recreated because you have your breath, and well, if I just apply attention to the breath, I can get this bliss or concentration again. And it's maybe a little more reproducible in a way, but looking back, even that was a hindrance to my just being with my breath and being like, what is my breath right now? And just like having this fresh mind. But I think doing this practice that I've been doing more lately around not having an object, being open to all objects, that seems even more, maybe I could say there's more pressure, it feels like, in a way, to not do that, because there's more change in general or something. And if I'm not open to that, then I'm not actually doing the practice. I'm actually like clinging to some past experience or memory and trying to like bring that into my moment, rather than actually just doing or allowing all of the experience to come to me as it does anyways. So yeah, that's kind of what comes to mind.
Yeah. See, I find it, this is just my own, personality or idiosyncrasy. Like, I'm not particularly good in tracking what happens. Like, I don't know if I could ever write an autobiography. It would be like, geez, like, I don't know. I don't know how all these events unfolded, or it's like my memory is very blurry. I don't have a timeline. It's just like I've accepted that about my mind. It's great in a way because that allows me to not dwell on the past so much. But what I wanted to say is, like, I feel that from the beginning, having been kind of acculturated as a practitioner in the Soto Zen, in a Soto Zen context, where we have this idea that meditation is just sitting, Dogen's teachings, there's not really like counting the breath or following the breath. Dogen doesn't talk about that anywhere. He says, like, take care of your posture and then sit. And then questions around intention, it's like, isn't intention a hindrance? Like, if you have intention in your practice of doing something or accomplishing something, isn't that a hindrance? Isn't that actually leading you away from this present moment experience? These kinds of ideas, they were always floating around in my world. So I was always wondering whether, a practice that was too goal-oriented, wasn't this actually a problem? And I think that influenced me. At some point, because just sitting is so inaccessible as a phrase, it's like just sitting, so then what? Okay, so just sit, that's it. It's very inaccessible, I think, initially. I realized that I could translate that for myself into allowing my experiencing, with an emphasis here on experiencing as a verb rather than experience, allowing my experiencing to be exactly what it is at this time. So to realize that there's just some appearance right now that I can open up to and be accepting of and investigating to, and that's already changing. That's experiencing, so it will fade and there will be something else. And so to take a posture of allowing toward that process in sitting. So just sitting became that for me. Allowing my experiencing in the posture of sitting to be exactly what it is at this time. And for a while I was, I think, using counting and following the breath as a kind of entry into that sort of open awareness. And then when I felt like, okay, so this is present now, I would just release myself into that. So there was also not either open awareness or breath practice. It was like the breath practice was kind of the first phase of my sitting period. And then as attention was stabilizing, I gave myself permission to just be resting in the field of mind. And then observing that, how I felt like, oh, this field of mind, that's the real self, kind of like feeling like I needed to be there. That was another form of attachment that just naturally showed itself.
Yeah, I think I've experienced that a little bit in terms, like there's an identification with that piece, and then it becomes almost immediately an obstacle in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And on this, there's something kind of related where there's all these words people use to describe, like, okay, if you're sitting in awareness and allowing things as they are, people will use the word emptiness, right? Or non-self, these words, bringing it in. And I wonder, from your view, is there, like, what is the value in evaluating one's meditation practice in terms of things like emptiness? Am I experiencing emptiness? Is there, I know in Rinzai, I think in Soto too, there's this concept of kensho, right? Like, from your training, is there an importance of like bringing those ideas in of like, oh, you saw emptiness to this degree or to that degree, or it's not enough yet, or like, how do you relate to this as maybe a teacher or maybe as a student as well?
Yeah, there was no emphasis on kensho in my training at all. There's never a sense of like, there's something you need to achieve here. This, there's a image that Zenki Roshi, my spiritual grandfather, used, where he was saying practice is like walking in the fog, and then after walking in the fog for a good while, you realize that you're completely wet. And that idea of enlightenment as gradual, it's more the Soto style compared to a breakthrough experience that is more emphasized in the Rinzai school, as I understand it, is, I think, is underlying this sense of not trying to evaluate students' progress according to, kensho experiences and so forth. I'm not saying that's the right thing, I have also not enough experience in the Rinzai school. Like, I talk to Rinzai practitioners now and then, but I don't have the expertise to compare the two and say what's better. But in my training, it was like that. It was more like, well, you're walking in the fog, so just keep walking. I remember relating an experience that, maybe would qualify as kensho to my teacher, and then he said, well, this is going to continue to unfold in you. So it was affirmation and taking it away at the same time. It's like, it's going to continue to unfold in you. You know that, there's nothing to, that was important to me. A kind of, recognition, but also normalization of it. It's like not some achievement. So.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I ask for a few reasons, but one of which, thinking back to earlier, you were talking about sports, and I also was a huge sports player and played in college, football, ski racing, all of this, and I think some of the early traditions I was involved with, there's a way in which that competitive achievement thing, I'm not saying it's the lineage or the traditions, we're advocating for this, but the way I interfaced with it, coming from like, I gotta be, the best student and the best athlete, bringing that into spiritual practice of like, okay, when have I hit the benchmark? At what point is it enough? When did I achieve the thing? And it definitely got in there. And I think watching that unravel, or allowing that sort of dynamic to unravel as it relates to practice, has been super liberating for me. And I think for me that relationship it brought in another thing that was like a filter on my experience, or like this attitude that seeped in. Mm-hmm. It's like this motivating attitude, and like a little striving, but not in maybe not a always wholesome striving. So anyways, that's kind of why I'd be curious. It doesn't, and I guess for me, the Soto and the school that predates Soto in China as well, that attitude was like, when I started reading, I was, that sounds really relieving and relaxing, of a way of orienting towards meditation and towards spirituality. So I think for me, is medicine there for my mind.
Yeah, I mean, practices are antidotes. So if you are mired in striving, non-doing is an antidote. Non-striving, allowing, giving yourself radical permission to yourself, giving the present moment radical permission to be just as it is. And but I can imagine that for some people this is also really disorienting, because they need more structure and more, structure, maybe determination too. I've heard it say that the Soto Zen practitioners were ridiculed as sleepyheads, Yeah, I think that's a potential downfall, that you just kind of like, whatever, it's kind of passive. You just allow things. There's no, maybe not enough intentionality. So then that could use an antidote, maybe.
Yeah.
But for me, maybe like you, I remember, like, I stopped doing team sports at a certain point, but I was continuing with, and I was more like, as a swimmer, I did long distances, and I did not long but short triathlons. So I kept up a practice of running, and I noticed at some point that I was kind of in competition with myself. It's like, would measure myself, like how far, how long, how fast. And at some point, it stopped making sense. I wanted to be more located in my body sensations, and yes, exercise the body and its physical strength, but doing it from a place of embodiment and what felt right. And the rightness here isn't just like, it includes an edge. It includes like, I want to, I'm willing to feel this pain in my running, or, because I'm noticing that works my body in a healthy way. But similarly in spiritual practice, there are edges that appear. It's like you notice how you feel separated, and then that's an edge, and you do need to stay with that. That needs to continue to be an investigation. If it stops being an investigation, then the practice becomes kind of dull. You're just sort of sitting around. That can happen in our style of practice, I think. So that's then, to be in conversation with a teacher and other practitioners and getting input and staying true to your subtle suffering too, and not just your coarse suffering, is important.
Yeah, it sounds like, especially what you last said around, there's a way to like compete with yourself, both, you could say athletically, but spiritually, where, you're taking like maybe things you've read in texts or things teachers have said, and there's like a conceptual overlay of like achievement or states. And then I guess how I interpret what you just said is around like almost an inside out. It's not a competition, but being aware of like what is experientially stuck or inhibiting your peace, and how can you work with that in sitting or through discussion with a teacher? Like, what is the way through your inside out obstacles from your direct experience, rather than maybe some idea of how things should be, but actually like accepting where you are now and what is the path kind of maybe through that.
Yeah, I think, again, I don't have any first-hand experience of a full koan curriculum in the Rinzai school, but one way I understand sort of an alert practitioner in the way I've learned the practice would be like you're progressing through your own koan curriculum. It's like by noticing those edges in your life. It's like there are issues and you kind of need to take them up. And what I like about that is that it actually just unfolds almost organically with your own life, with your own practice. It's not like a curriculum that's coming from the outside that you go through. It's the curriculum of your life. But you need to sort of have the wherewithal to notice those edges, those koans. That can be difficult, I think.
Yeah.
One could feel lost in that and not, see clearly enough.
Yeah. I know that, I imagine for others, for me, if I'm basically just not sitting a lot or enough, then there becomes a lot of edges and I'm not really aware of any of them in a way. But if I can sit, I can work through the more coarse ones and then eventually get down to like a little bit of a more, something that's affecting me over a longer period, that's more subtle and kind of like more of a real, or more of a prescient is the word, maybe more important sort of thing that's there.
Yeah.
One thing comes to mind from our weekend. We just spent a weekend together studying Zenki, the text, not to be confused with your name, from Dogen. And I he says, it's a thesis statement maybe, of life is like riding in a boat. At least that stuck out to me out of the many things that were. And we talked about this for, it's been like 10 hours during this practice period, so it might be too much to go into here today. But I guess as you're talking about practice, I wonder if when Dogen is saying life is like riding in a boat and there's a lot of ways we looked at this, and there was some conclusion, sort of. But you have the sail and the rudder, and there's a person who's active. There's activity there. And I want to get into like that in life, and what is that when we're in more obvious activity, moving our bodies, saying words, taking choices. But I guess in practice, would you say that there's still... Does that metaphor apply if you're just sitting Zazen? Is there a way in which you are... This is a big question, I guess, but how do you conceive of this boat experience in Zazen? Is there still this person that's steering, and is there still this activity component? Or are you just letting the boat go?
Yeah. Well, Dogen says there, you set the sail, you steer with the rudder, you use the pole to push, I assume, push the boat forward. And yet, the boat is giving you a ride. Right? So, there in this phrase, you have two sides. You are riding the boat through those activities, steering, pushing forward, harnessing the wind through the sail. That's a doing, and yet the boat is giving you a ride. So, is it one or the other, or are both happening? Or, to stay with the theme of this fascicle, which has been translated in various ways, but one translation is undivided activity. So the undividedness here of the self and the situation. And something I learned, was taught, is like right effort is a balance between making it happen and letting it happen, which is sort of an idea that made a big impression on me and stayed with me. And that sometimes we need to make things happen, and sometimes we need to let things happen. And that in accord with a situation, maybe you have more of a feeling that you are needing to make something happen. And at other times you can kind of just let it happen. But are they ever really divided? Probably not. And you could say letting something happen is allowing the situation to make you into something, or make something happen. You make something happen in accord with what the situation lets you do, for me, because I was much more stuck in making it happen, the letting it happen was very important. Like, let the boat give you a ride. I can imagine another person who is more like, let's see what happens, and they're less active or less inclined to take initiative, right? Then making it happen in this particular metaphor, like, I could like push with the pole. I could use my intention to steer the boat. It could be a discovery. So now I experience it as very undivided. When you feel the undividedness of making it happen and letting it happen, it's a kind of flow feeling, right? It's like a conversation that flows. The conversation is happening, and it makes you into something. It makes you into the kind of conversation partner that you become through the conversation, and in a different conversation you be a different self. But at the same time, like the way you are now doing an interview, you have some ideas. you've prepared something, and I think that's probably good. Like, will you choose it all? Will you choose, like, the range of questions that are on your mind, will you use them all? No, because what the boat allows you to do as it starts to, float is, okay, well, that didn't really come up, so, you leave that aside, but this, seems like worth pursuing. So in the end, what happened there? Some combination. I think to feel at ease with that, with allowing life to give us a ride, but also be at ease with the fact that we have agency and to use it, is equally important. I mean, if you were to deny your agency, that's denying half of the truth. We can make things happen. It makes a difference whether you go to the left or go to the right. I mean, like we've got to take decisions like that in our life now and then, where it feels like, and then you lose something. That's initiative. That's steering. That's using the rudder, and we're taking the boat this way.
Yeah, it seems like there's a maturity in knowing or allowing one to make things happen when that's the relevant thing to do, and let things happen. And as you are stating, in a way, they're undivided, but there's a way I see of essentially either extreme for too long. Like if you were to cling to one, it doesn't really make sense. It's not really natural, because there are things that are steerable, and it's like if you deny that and that doesn't feel like respectful to my life, or to one's life, to their way of kind of steering that. And yeah, for me, there's been a lot of making it happen in my life, and I've benefited from that. And I do think, though, the way of letting it happen, and it's interesting you mentioned just the conversation, I have a few questions written down, and it's experientially, it's very interesting to be like, well, there are these things I want to ask you, but if all I do is think about what I want to ask you, I won't hear you. And then I will it's a way of, I don't know what the right word is, but there's a way that I'm denying what's happening, or it could be, and I did some prep, and there's some interesting things I could ask you. So they're both true. And
yeah. And then there's a way that where you feel, it's a little bit like reading the ocean, maybe, to stay with this metaphor, like to read the currents and the wind, and it's like, then you feel like, okay, so now this is kind of done, and now you can take a different tack, and you can then make an initiative, and then say like, okay, so let's have this be done, and now let's go into something new. That's completely fine, and that's not disrespectful. That's not like not listening to someone. I want to be open to what you have in mind too, I want to be open to that. I've heard myself talk, so now you have some questions. So this is a back and forth. It's that undividedness is really, it's a mystery, and it's also the joy of life in a way, to start to be at ease with that. That's how things actually are unfolding. It's a little bit like an artist, working with a material, and there's something coming from the material, but there's also something coming from the artist that the artist imposes on the material. But if you were just imposing something on the material, that is kind of disrespectful, maybe, right? And it wouldn't work in the end, because you've got to work with it. But it's a real dialogue. It's not separate. You can't separate it.
When you say that, I I think in life, it feels like you could think of one's life. There's art, there's conversation, these are things that might make up one's life, but even on the just this concept of our life, I guess I have this sense of, I've gone through life at times having an idea of what I want to do and what results I want, how things should go. And so there's a very making it happen. And it's, if I'm too hard there, which I maybe mostly have been, there's a lot of lost opportunity, I guess, in receptivity to what actually is what is life bringing to me. And if I don't incorporate that or work with that or allow that a bit, there's a way in which life wants things to happen also, maybe, I don't know how to put it, but if there's going to be a lot of extra effort if I'm always swimming upstream, or if I'm always kind of this is how things are kind of going, but I really need them to go this way, so I'm going to exert that and just assert that. But it's could it be okay to bring this thing in, and then you still have these things, and it's all aligned, but it's not, there's not a violence. I'm hesitant to use that word, but there could be almost a type of no, it can't go this way because I don't want to. But it's how can I work with the materials? Thinking about life as a craft, as you sometimes say. It's life is bringing these things that I can pretend I can control all these things, but I actually can't, so there's no use trying. Better to work with the material that's at hand.
Yeah. I think after trying too hard to make things happen, I really landed on the other side, and I just kind of went along with what happened. And almost to a fault at this point, I think I could, rediscover to make some things happen. I mean, this could go into personal stories about that, but I see that, I think I've maybe overcorrected in some ways. But mostly I see it as more of a kind of learning experience of what is it like to just let things happen and be, not so ambitious about certain things, and just see which doors want to open rather than I gotta open this door, so it felt really right to me to take that aggression out of my life as much as possible. And then craft also, craft is, you can learn some skills, and we're discussing something here that I think is conceptually pretty clear, actually, making it happen, letting it happen. People who have, some sensitivity in their life can apply that and say okay, well, I'm kind of doing making it happen here, and here I'm doing letting it happen. But then for something to become mastery, it just needs experience, and it needs kind of mistakes as well as successes, where something worked or something didn't quite work, or created friction or created suffering, and then through experience it would be very difficult to describe it, and how do you pass it on? You couldn't really teach somebody. You can show it by example if you have that mastery. And that's sometimes useful, to have people in your life to just study. It's wow, how are they doing this? It's wow, I wouldn't have known how to navigate this situation, and this looked easy, or this looked graceful, and you kind of just want to study almost the mental posture that's behind that, receive that. Be willing to receive that.
Yeah, it's those concepts are very helpful for me.